Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Recently, one of my friends told me that he was going to be selling the majority of his card collection, and he offered me the opportunity to be able to kind of look at some of the vintage cards and have sort of first peek at them and make an offer for these cards before he actually took them to a local card show to be able to start making a transaction with the general public. So I went over to his house the last few days over the course of the last week, and we were able to kind of sort through some of his cards to get him ready to be able to sell those things come this card show coming up soon. But during the transaction, I was able to kind of pull out a few things that I was interested in. He allowed me to kind of take them home and do a little bit more research on what a competitive comp might be. And then I submitted my kind of estimates back to him, as well as like a sort of an estimated offer. And he came back to me with an offer, and I accepted. I didn't end up picking up every card that I brought home with me, so I'm going to be bringing some of these back to him. But I just wanted to show you the ones that I agreed to purchase. So I'm going to be showing you these cards here. And, I will say they're a good mix of vintage. Mostly they're going to be cards from the 1960s, although we have some good ones from the 1950s in here. He definitely had a good eye for some vintage cards, so I'm pretty happy with the cards. And I feel like I picked up the ones that had good eye appeal overall. And some actually have pretty good grades, given how old they are. So I think probably the easiest way to do it will probably just be to go from, I have them already sorted in order to people when I put them away. So I think I'm going to go from oldest to newest. Newest to oldest. So we're going to start in the 80s. There was a couple cards in the 80s. So the first one I picked up was the Cal Ripken Jr. rookie card. I already have the Topps traded card, but I didn't have a copy of this one, at least graded, because I only have one in my binder for my set. So I was happy to be able to pick that up. It's in an older SGC older, but it came out as about a SGC 8, if you will. So, I mean, those cards aren't like terribly expensive because there are obviously a lot of them. Only like the 10s are going to be ones that really kill you. I just have a hard time paying for a 10 price on a card that was produced in the 1980s or later, just because they produced so many of them, unless they're like short printed serial numbered cards. But the majority of 80s cards, there's a lot of them out there. So, I just kind of want to be in that sort of safe space where I feel like I'm getting a really nice copy at a decent grade without kind of overspending on a card that ungraded would be worth far less, even if it is in good condition. All right, so that was the first one. Next one is also going to be another dual rookie card. Now we're into the 70s. And he was a Cubs fan, so you'll see a lot of Cubs players featured on here, and this would be the Hawk. This would be Andre Dawson. This came back in a near mint PSA 8, so you kind of see him on here along with the other three ball players who had careers. I think Gene Richards and Denny Walling probably had the biggest careers of the three others that are featured there, but obviously the Hawk is the featured one, and it's in a near mint 8, which is actually a pretty good grade for this card, given the quality control that they had during the late 1970s in particular. That is a pretty nice copy overall of that card, so I was really happy to be able to have that in the transaction. In fact, it's one of the featured cards in it. Then a couple 75s. This is going to be the Phil Niekro card in an 8. I think at some point, I picked this one up because at some point I think I want to be able to get, even though I have this set already, graded copies of at least maybe the 1975 cards, because I always thought this was a pretty cool design. 75 and 72 are my favorite sets from the 70s by far. I think it's the colors that really catch my eye, and that's why I really enjoy them. It's funny, when I was 20 some years ago, when I was putting those sets together, you could still get like unopened wax boxes and such of these cards, and they were getting a little bit more expensive, but they weren't nearly as expensive as they are now. That was a time where people were kind of still buying them at a reasonable price, if you will, and then taking them in and getting the higher copies graded at a much lower cost and making a profit as a result of it. Here we have the Nolan Ryan highlight card. This came back in a 6. It's got a little fisheye right here below the 300. I think that had everything to do with it kind of coming back as a lower grade, but it is a really sharp looking card. And again, I mentioned like trying to get the Hall of Famers from that set. I think it would be like a project at some point I want to do, and getting them encapsulated. So those are the first 4 cards I got. I got 16 altogether, so we'll go through the next ones. And now we're into the 1960s. Starting with a 66 Topps card, and this is going to be Ferguson Jenkins for his rookie card with the Philadelphia Phillies. The next very season, he was with the Cubs on the 67 set. This one I already had, but I didn't have it graded. I had considered submitting it for grading, which I hadn't done yet. My copy looks about the same as this one. I think the centering on the back may be a little bit worse than this one. I think I'm gonna hold on to it just in case I get to see Ferguson Jenkins at a show and see if I can get his autograph on that other one. So if it's not too unreasonably priced. So here we go, Ferguson Jenkins. I mentioned he's a Cubs fan, so it's gonna be a theme. This one, I would say it's a little out of place, but it's a relatively bigger card in this transaction. And it's a 1965 Roger Maris. Again, an older SGC holder. I think made it a little bit more affordable for him to acquire and also for me to be able to reacquire from him. Just a fun looking set. I think the 65 set, I think there's nothing wrong with this set. It's got wonderful eye appeal. I mean, centering is going to be a problem on this card as they are with anything during the 1960s. But the pennant is just such a nice little design on these cards. And obviously you got the full portrait image for him. This obviously is going to be during spring training. You can see the palm tree in the background there. It's got a super clean back, even though it is miscut, because you can see the part of the other card on there. But just a really nice copy of this card. All the corners and edges look really nice. It's just more of a centering issue. So I was happy to be able to acquire the Roger Maris card for my collection. And that's a set I might want to put together at some point too. I like 65. This next card is one I actually have in a pile to get graded, and now I will kind of consider whether I want to do that for selling it if I think it'll be enough high enough grade. And this is the 1961 Stan Usual on SGC 5. Just like mine, the centering is off. I think mine might be slightly centered better, but the corners and the edges aren't nearly as sharp as this one, which I think kind of brought the grade up overall. Just a really nice example of this card from the 61 set. There's going to be a few 61s as we go through here. I'll show you in a minute, because now we're going to move on to some Hall of Fame rookies. Starting with the Billy Williams, which is a card that I did want to acquire now that I got his rookie card signed, at least my copy signed. I wanted to get at least a graded copy from this card as well, just to kind of have it to go along with the autograph. So here it is in a PSA 5. Get another really great copy. There's just some fish eyeing that happened for whatever reason with the coloring on his sleeve and his hat. And I think that's the big thing that kind of deterred from this kind of coming back as a higher grade. But I mean, a 5 on a rookie card from the early 60s is perfectly fine. All right, last one from 61. Ron Santo. I didn't have this one graded. I'm going to have this card in a pile to be graded. I probably will send that one in just to see what it comes back as. Mine's got a little better centering overall. The edges aren't as good as this one, so we'll see what it comes back as. It might also be another 5, but let's see if we can beat it. It's not a horribly expensive card, but it would be worth it to get a second copy and be able to resell the other. It kind of meets that threshold for me. And then we have a Nellie Fox, 1960 tops. It probably will be one of the sets I'll be working on in the near future as I finish up other projects. I always liked 1960. It is beautiful. I love the design of the card, at least on the front, where it has the action image followed by like a portrait of him. And on the back, it talks a little bit about his overall stats and highlights. It doesn't have his full career stats, nor do they usually do season highlights or career highlights, which this one ends on November 12th with him winning the National League MVP award. Take down Roger, put up Nellie. All right, now we're going to be in the 50s. So this one is probably the highlight of the order. And not because of so much who it is, but the condition it is in. And it is a Hall of Famer, and it's a 1959 All-Star, a Bill Mazeroski, but it came back as an 8. So this is like a pack fresh card. You know, they don't get much better than this. I mean, obviously there are graded copies that are higher in 9s and 10s of this card, but it would be like super expensive to acquire either one of them. The back has definitely got some aging on there, but that would be expected. It's not nearly as white as it once was, probably when it came right out of the pack, but that's normal aging. So this is totally fine for a card that is like over 60 years old. In fact, it's 65 years old now. Really happy to have it. Goes really well with the 59 base card I have of his now at this point. So move Stan, put Bill up. I'd say that is the highlight of the order. But we're in the 50s, so there's always great cards in the 50s. And we have Luis Aparicio, who I didn't have. I didn't have the Luis Aparicio card, the 59 tops. So I was happy to pick it up at a 5. This one wasn't terribly expensive to be able to throw into the order, and you know, it's Luis, so happy to be able to pick that one up. Got a couple White Sox up here now. Speaking of White Sox, we have a former White Sox at this point, even though he was reacquired by the White Sox later on and also played briefly for St. Louis, and that would be Minnie Minoso. Minnie Minoso obviously started his career in Cleveland, got transitioned or traded over to the White Sox, where he became known as a star and eventually a Hall of Famer. But with this card, he got traded over to the Cleveland Indians in exchange for Early Wynn and Al Smith, who are big parts of the '59 White Sox. And I think towards the end of the season, I think Minnie even rejoined the team, if I'm not mistaken. But there it is, Minnie Minoso. 59 tops in an SGC 5.5. Very solid example of that card. So pretty good portrait image of him as well. Staying with 59, got one more. It is another Nellie Fox card to replace a Nellie Fox card in the background, but this time it's a 6. It's his MVP card from 1959. This was the year that he won the American League MVP, and they went to the World Series. And this is a beautiful copy. It's a pretty bright back, so it hasn't aged too badly. You could say that the image on this card is always a little bit dim in comparison to some other 59 cards, just because I think it was the image itself, the picture they picked itself, I think was not a very bright or sunny day, so it didn't really kind of bring out a lot of the colors in the background, so it does kind of look a little dull, especially when they used orange as the background. I think it might have been popped a little more if they'd picked a different color. So I don't think it's nearly as attractive as a 60 card. But it's still great to have in the collection. At some point, I want to probably try to be able to get the 59 Sox and Dodgers to kind of put together a little something for the 59 World Series. All right, I got 2 left, and this is one of the last big ones, and it's actually a 1958 Topps Ernie Banks. As I mentioned, he's a big Cubs fan, so this was a nice acquisition for him. Really, the only thing in my mind for this card is the centering. And for me, it doesn't deter it. It's not massively off-center, but it has, I think that's why it wasn't graded higher at the end of the day. But, you know, like it ended up being a really good deal overall to be able to acquire it because of the grade that it received, and probably was a good deal for him when he picked it up as well. Just a great card of an all-time great Chicago baseball player and one of the best players of all time. You know, over 500 home runs for Ernie Banks. This was one of his back-to-back MVP seasons. I'll replace the other big one there, the Bill Mazeroski. And then the final one I have to share with you, the final one in this transaction, is the only common that I picked up, but it is a really sharp, high-quality common from the 1952 Bowman set. And it's going to be a Bruce Edwards, but it came back in a 7, and this card is just perfect. There's maybe just a little tips on the edges here that resulted in it not grading a little bit higher, but a 7 for 52 Bowman. I mean, like, come on. I would say that if it was a 7 and 52 Topps, you'd be talking a very different price range for whatever reason. The Bowman set just isn't as popular despite it being beautiful. I think sometimes the images on the 52 Bowman cards are just as nice, if not better, than the 52 Topps cards. It's really the back that kind of lets them down because they followed the same format they did in previous seasons, where they did a little narrative and talked about it, as opposed to obviously a good old 52 Topps has the large stat line as well with a narrative. But that is it, guys. These are the really nice ones I picked up. Hope you guys kind of enjoyed them. And I will see you all again soon.